Nike Air is perhaps the most significant technology ever to happen to performance in even casual shoes. But what does it actually do? Is it beneficial to you? Is it still even relevant in modern shoes? And most importantly, what does the future of Nike Air look like? Well, let's look at the entire lineup and get to the bottom of Nike Air. So to answer all those questions, we got to go back to the very first iteration of Nike Air, which was the Nike Air Sole. Now, the Nike Air Sole was a multi-layer polyurethane film with sulfur hexafluoride in it. Why sulfur hexafluoride? Because it was a stable, dense gas and it didn't leak out. It was basically easy to put into a pouch. The way air soles are made is by thermo welding, where the sheets of polyurethane, or the pouch, are melded together except for a very tiny port which the gas is pumped in, and that port is actually melted shut, hence the thermo welding. And that's all great, except that SF, sulfur hexafluoride, is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's kind of toxic. So in the late 90s, this was actually switched to nitrogen, which then created another issue because N2 molecules are very small compared to SF and could leak out. They actually had to swap out the air bag itself for a more containing TPU or PEBX sheets to make the bag, which also made those airbags lighter and stronger, leading to a lot of the weird, wild shapes that we see in Nike Air units today. Now, the pros of the original Air Sole were many. I mean, the midsole felt much more comfortable, soft, and reactive versus the brittle foams of that day. It was also so much lighter for the volume it took up, especially since, again, the foams of that day, in the early 80s, were very, very heavy. But the problem with the Air Sole is, you can just tell by looking at the structure of it, the air soles are kind of unstable. The original urethane pouches degraded and leaked, they cracked, and since they really were kind of unstable, they really only cushioned up and down versus what we see, later in the video with later Zoom and Air Max units. Still though, for the time, this was pretty serious technology in terms of pure cushion, a significant step up from the polyurethane and EVA brick-like foams, like I said, of that day. So next up was Visible Air. Now, Visible Air was made of the exact same materials as an air sole at the time, polyurethane and SF gas. The difference was that it was visible, and that meant it had to resist more force. So the airbag itself is stronger, so the air unit feels more like a tense balloon or exercise ball, and less plush like the couch-like feeling of the air sole when it was kind of integrated into the foam. But once again, for the time, these were lighter and a bit more springy than traditional foams, especially for the volume of these things, which tended to be a bit larger than the smaller air soles that actually had to be integrated into the foam. But the problem with Visible Air, like air soles, was again with stability, not so much because they were soft, but because they were stiff and didn't deform linearly. Meaning at low loads, Visible Air feels harder than you'd expect, but at high loads, it deforms more and suddenly. So it doesn't deform evenly with force, more resists up to a point and then fails. So it could kind of feel clunky going from heel to toe. Now, Air Max and Visible Air were released around the same time, with Air Max being like the dedicated product line, whereas Visible Air was literally meant to describe air units that were visible. So very similar and to an extent interchangeable, for a while until Zoom started being made visible. Now, Air Max is made of the exact same base materials as the Air Sole and Visible Air units, but they're meant to be much larger volumes of air in which the shoe is designed around the Air Max unit versus the Air Sole and Visible Air, which was designed around the shoe's larger silhouette. So basically, it's just the design philosophy that's the difference between Air Max and Visible Air. Now, interestingly enough, Rafa Nadal loved Air Max so much, he actually had them hidden in his custom Nikes because they wanted him to promote the new Cage 3 shoe, which is what this looked like, but it didn't have Air Max. So it is possible to bury these units, but for the most part, Nike wants these prominent like this one, as much as possible to give the shoe a futuristic look. But you can make like a modern day Air Sole out of Air Max. You just kind of have to engineer it a little bit, and you have to win as many Grand Slams as Rafa Nadal has. And speaking of Nike wanting Air Max to be prominent in the shoes they put it in, a lot of you know Air Max has its own day on the calendar. That's how popular it is. Nike has made these into horseshoe units or 270 units, full-length units, into pods, combine them with Zoom, whether it be hybrided or in a separate system. And in modern-day court shoes like basketball and tennis, you'll almost always nowadays see the Air Max unit in the rear foot because of how unstable they are when placed in the forefoot due to that large volume of air not allowing your body's proprioceptors to sense the ground. Although Nike did do a ton of experimenting with Air Max and the LeBron line, with, we'll say, varying success. These days though, I'd say in terms of performance shoes, Air Max is mostly a personal preference thing. There are just more stable, comfy foams out there versus Air Max, but some athletes just love the tensile balloon feeling the TPU and gas produces, like Rafa. Interestingly enough, if you look at Boost foam, it's kind of like just having mini Air Max units with the TPU foam bubbles filled with gas and an open cell foam. That might be why so many people like me like it so much. No, there's not the tension in Boost like there is in Air Max, but to me, it almost feels like there's a bunch of mini Air Max units in there. The other thing I will say that goes all the way back to the Air sole would be my personal favorite, and that is Air Strobel. Now this is basically like an Air sole unit directly underfoot. Now the PSI on these does not seem to be as high as the peripheral ones. The bags on these are a little more comfortable, and it does feel just like a pillow. So in terms of Nike Air for just pure comfort, nothing in terms of performance, the Air Strobel, just having the Air unit stitched right into the Strobel border right where the footbed is, that is kind of the best use case of it. It really, to me, has to stay in the rear foot, really can't go into the forefoot, but kind of like in the Zion series, the early Zion series, where they would put Air Strobel in the back and then a Zoom in the forefoot. To me, that's out of this world in terms of comfort, but it doesn't do anything to the stability of the shoe. So you're getting all the best parts of the Air sole, all the best parts of the comfort with none of the drawbacks. Getting back to actually Air Max, I think although they are somewhat lightweight versus heavier EVA, modern foams have kind of rapidly caught up to this technology, but if you want that tensile exercise ball feel, Air Max is still kind of the way to go. And if Nike made more shoes with the peripheral tubes as air rims, as long as the foot was mostly contacting the ground through foam in the forefoot, it could be an interesting way to implement Air Max for modern and future shoes. Use the best parts of it for future shoes. But along that same vein of modern Air Max ideas, Nike had some of their own. There was tuned air or dynamic air, with tuned air having stronger internal pillars to prevent wobble, and dynamic air being adjacent air units with different pressure levels, usually higher tension in the heel and lower in the forefoot. And I think that's kind of cool, trying to mess with the pillars of the bag, or trying to mess with the tension in the bag. But the thing is to kind of put a button on the Air Max section. The idea, yeah, it's awesome. The implementation has been awesome, but at some point, there's only so much you can do with air in a plastic pouch. But when you add the technology of Zoom Air, you can do some more unique things, which we'll get to now. All right, so that means we are getting into the latest in the world of air, and that is Zoom Air and all of its hybrids. So Zoom Air, originally called Tensile Air, is actually a lot like Air Max, with the same materials making the pouch, and it's still nitrogen inside, but the bag is just much thinner, and with these small tensile fibers used to hold the bag shape. So whenever it's compressed, the fibers then snap back, holding its shape and tension, which is also what produces the bouncy feeling you get when you use them. The original intent was to be able to make the bag smaller. The kind of happy accident that happened was the real nice feeling of bounce you get with them. Now, the fact that these are so much thinner but have such high resilience versus Air Max is the reason you see them in so many different configurations, like the standard inserts in the rear and forefoot, full length zoom, Zoom Strobel where it sits right into the footbed, stacked zoom, parabolic zoom, Zoom Turbo, Zoom Pods, or even hybrid zoom where they added zoom fibers to the actual Air Max units. You can also shape zoom pretty much any way you want with the standard archway shape, or the heel shape, or the rectangles, but also things like the Mustang unit and the GT Hustle 3. You can also split the zoom unit to make it bend with the shoe more. That's kind of the same idea as Zoom Turbo, but just in a different way. Also, because of their profile, Zoom can easily be combined with other tech like Zoom X or carbon fiber in the fly plate like in the Vaporflies, or between two densities of foam like the Pegasus Premium, or combined with hard plastic in soccer or football boots or track shoes. But I would say probably the most iconic use of Zoom is in concert with Air Max, with Max in the heel and Zoom up front, much like a lot of tennis models used to be, as well as a lot in the LeBron line. And in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, I still think Zoom is still wholly relevant for both comfort, shock absorption, bounce, as well as weight reduction versus really any other modern foam or technology. But the new thermoplastics are catching up pretty quick, especially in the durability and bounce categories. In terms of shock absorption and comfort though, I feel like Zoom still is, if not at the head of the pack, it's up there at the top, just because to get to the level Zoom is at with a foam, you then kind of have to sacrifice something, whether that be stability or weight, versus in Zoom where you can kind of get the comfort, the bounce, the shock absorption, really everything all in one unit. The problem with Zoom though is that the rest of the shoe surrounding it recently hasn't lived up in a lot of circumstances, with some shoe models having bigger problems with stability, shape, and weight, which have like completely negated the benefits of the Zoom that have been in it. Put it this way, Zoom is great, but it won't just automatically save a bad shoe. But once again, like Air Max, I feel like I kind of harp on this a lot, this technology is not new. It's good, but it's not new. So where do we go from here? What can the future of Nike Air look like? Well, there's sufficient evidence that shows that even Nike doesn't know. Look at their Future on Air exhibit they had in Paris for the Olympics. They said themselves it was partially AI inspired, with most of the models looking nothing even remotely resembling a functional shoe, just had brightly colored zoom areas. Look at the Vomero Premium. Yeah, it looks wild, but it's just bigger zoom units. Same with the Pegasus Premium. Just exposed zoom, and in that case, a very unstable situation with React X as well as Zoom X. So in my opinion, this really isn't even a very viable design going forward. Although as a casual shoe, it is comfortable for some midfoot and forefoot strikers. It could be okay, but that's kind of getting into the weeds. All right, but at the risk of having an idea stolen, here's what I see as the future of Nike Air, what Nike can do to kind of update, make new models, new technologies out of Nike Air. So number one, you start playing with the ratios of gas itself. You could try something like more of an argon to nitrogen mixture and have hybrid zoom characteristics with more shock absorption or bounce. Or go wild with helium or CO2 units, as long as you could create pouches, to contain them, since they'd be so much more prone to leaking because the molecules are so small. You could also combo your Air with a silicone vapor for more shock absorption, although yeah, that would get expensive. The second idea would be to mess with the fibers or the tubules inside the units. Maybe figure out ways to make longitudinal struts instead of up and down that act more like muscle fibers to exert new and unique forces. Although that one would take a lot of testing to make sure to get that right, and that way it's not hurting you. No, first do no harm type thing. Then there's always what Nike kind of modeled the 19 after, which would be multiple chamber valves to shift air back and forth, like this shoe looks like it's supposed to be doing. There's also my favorite idea that I thought up, was that you could put foam on the inside of the Zoom, so line it with foam so that when the pouch deforms, it actually has something to rebound against, both on the bottom and on the top of the unit. But then there's also the world of aerogels too, which would be more of like a new product, but still something interesting to think about. Aerogels, in terms of shoes, I think would take a lot of product testing, be very expensive, but could be interesting to do. But I think the biggest determining factor in the future of Nike Air, and the biggest question out there really is, are you still interested in it? Are you still buying shoes for the Air? Have you moved on to something else? Does it even faze you anymore when you see a new version of Nike Air Max or Zoom? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you do want to check out the shoe line, that made Performance Air what it is today, check out this video right here where I cut open every single Air Jordan. And if you want to see what I think are kind of the worst shoe gimmicks out there, check this and why, and also what they're good for, make sure you check out this video right here. I'll see you in the next video.